The early morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Serenity Heights, casting warm golden hues over the polished marble floors. The gentle sound of fountains from the inner courtyard mingled with the occasional chirping of birds, creating an atmosphere of serenity and exclusivity. It was a place meticulously designed to exude calm, a haven for the ultra-wealthy to repair their broken lives away from prying eyes. Dr. Ethan Carrington sat at his desk in his sleek, minimalist office, staring at the thick file of his newest patient, Gregory Harlan, a tech billionaire whose addiction to prescription opioids had spiraled out of control. Gregory's neatly typed biography was both impressive and tragic. A self-made entrepreneur whose empire of apps and algorithms had revolutionized the tech world but left him grappling with unrelenting pressure and insomnia. His sessions with Ethan had been slow to start, the man guarded and defensive, his usual arrogance dulled by withdrawal. Ethan made a quick note in Gregory's file. Push deeper into family dynamics. Estranged son mentioned briefly, likely significant. A knock on his door broke his concentration. It was one of the facility's young interns, Mia, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Dr. Carrington, Mrs. Carrington asked me to remind you about the morning briefing, she said, her voice tinged with nervousness. Everyone, even the staff, seemed a little on edge around Sophia Carrington, the charismatic and demanding director of operations, and Ethan's wife. Ethan glanced at the clock on his desk. Thanks, Mia. I'll be there shortly. As Mia left, he heard faint laughter from the hallway. Sophia's laugh, warm, melodic, and practiced, was unmistakable, followed by a deeper, masculine chuckle. His grip on the pen tightened involuntarily. Rising from his chair, he straightened his tie and smoothed the front of his jacket before stepping out. The corridor leading to the conference room was lined with abstract artwork in muted tones, chosen to inspire introspection and patience. But Ethan wasn't looking at the art. He followed the sound of voices until he spotted Sophia standing at the far end of the hallway, talking to Victor Lang, a new patient. Victor, a hedge fund manager who had checked in 3 weeks ago for stress-related health issues, exuded confidence. Tall and broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that looked effortlessly groomed, he seemed more like a polished politician than a man seeking help. Sophia stood close to him, her hand resting lightly on her clipboard as they spoke. You've been doing great, Victor, Sophia was saying, her tone laced with encouragement. The team is really impressed with your progress. Victor's grin was wolfish. Well, I couldn't have done it without your guidance. You make it easy to want to improve. Ethan slowed his pace, staying just out of sight. Sophia laughed softly, and something in her posture, a slight tilt of her head, the way her hand brushed Victor's arm, sent a sharp jolt of unease through him. He told himself it was nothing, just part of her natural charm. After all, Sophia's warmth and attentiveness were part of what made her so effective at her job. Still, as the two disappeared into the conference room, the uneasy feeling lingered. The conference room was already buzzing with activity when Ethan entered. A dozen staff members were gathered around the long oak table, laptops open and papers scattered. Sophia stood at the head of the table, her commanding presence instantly drawing attention. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice smooth and authoritative. Let's dive into today's agenda. We've got several key updates to go over. She nodded toward Dr. Amanda Voss, the facility's lead psychiatrist. Amanda, can you give us a status report on the group therapy sessions? Amanda adjusted her glasses and consulted her notes. Of course. Attendance has been strong this week, and we're seeing progress in several patients. For instance, Gregory Harlan participated actively for the first time yesterday. He shared some insights about his struggles with his son, which is a breakthrough for him. Ethan nodded in agreement. Gregory's been tough to crack, but that's promising. We'll build on that in our one-on-one sessions. Sophia smiled at Ethan, her expression unreadable. Great work, Ethan. Gregory's a challenging case, but I'm confident in your ability to help him. Victor, seated a few chairs down, interjected with a grin. Dr. Carrington's reputation precedes him. No wonder Serenity Heights is the gold standard. The room chuckled politely, and Ethan forced a smile, though he couldn't shake the feeling that Victor's compliment carried an edge of mockery. As the meeting continued, Ethan's focus wavered. His eyes kept drifting to Sophia and Victor, catching fleeting moments of shared glances and subtle gestures. He clenched his jaw, silently reprimanding himself for his growing paranoia. "You're imagining things," he told himself. "Focus." After the meeting, Ethan lingered, pretending to check his notes as the others filtered out. He watched as Sophia and Victor moved toward her office, their conversation low and animated. His stomach churned. He knew it wasn't his place to interfere. Victor was a patient, and Sophia was simply doing her job. But the way they interacted felt different. He waited until the hallway was empty before approaching Sophia's office. The door was slightly ajar, and as he drew closer, their voices became audible. "A few more weeks, and we'll see results," Sophia was saying. "We just need to be careful. He's paying attention." Victor chuckled softly. "Don't worry, Sophia. I've got this under control." Ethan's heart thudded in his chest. Who's paying attention? He pressed himself against the wall, careful not to be seen. Sophia's tone grew softer, almost tender. "Just don't do anything reckless. If he starts asking questions, it could complicate things." "Relax," Victor replied, his voice dripping with confidence. "He's too focused on his patients to notice anything else." Ethan stepped back quickly, his mind racing. He didn't have the full picture, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt. Were they talking about him? About the facility? Or was this something more personal? That evening, as Ethan stood on the balcony of their shared suite, he couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. The grounds below were illuminated by soft lights, the fountains casting rippling reflections across the manicured lawns. It was a perfect picture of serenity, a facade, much like the one he suspected his marriage had become. Sophia joined him, a glass of wine in hand. She leaned against the railing, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the garden lights. "Long day?" she asked, her tone casual. Ethan forced a smile. "The usual. How about you?" "Exhausting," she said with a sigh. "Victor's case is proving to be more complicated than expected. He's charming, but there's a lot beneath the surface." Ethan studied her carefully, searching for cracks in her composure. "He seems to like you." Sophia laughed lightly, taking a sip of her wine. "He's just grateful for the support. Patients need someone to trust." Ethan nodded, though her words felt rehearsed, too polished. He turned his gaze back to the garden, his mind racing. The perfect facade of Serenity Heights mirrored their marriage, beautiful on the outside, but hiding something far darker beneath. As the night deepened, Ethan made a quiet resolution. Whatever was happening, between Sophia and Victor, or within the walls of the facility, he would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The first crack in the perfect facade had appeared, and Ethan wasn't going to let it close. The following morning, Ethan arrived early at Serenity Heights, his thoughts still clouded by the cryptic conversation he'd overheard the night before. The sun was barely cresting over the facility's sprawling grounds, bathing the modern architecture in a soft orange glow. Patients were starting to trickle into the courtyard for yoga sessions, their subdued chatter blending with the soothing sound of fountains. Ethan nodded absently at a passing nurse and headed toward his office. He needed to center himself before his first session with Lila Harper, a patient who had been at the facility for almost 2 months. Lila was a former investigative journalist whose career had imploded after a high-profile lawsuit left her reputation in tatters. She turned to alcohol to cope, and her time at Serenity Heights was a last-ditch effort to rebuild her life. Ethan found Lila already seated in his office, her dark hair pulled back into a messy bun, and her sharp green eyes scanning the room with an alertness that belied her shaky hands. "Morning, Lila," Ethan greeted, settling into his chair. "You're early." "I don't sleep much," she replied, her voice tinged with a sarcastic edge. "Too many ghosts rattling around in my head." Ethan gave her a small, understanding smile. "That's what we're here to work on. How's your week been?" She crossed her arms, her gaze flickering to the window. "Fine. Same old. Group sessions are interesting. Lots of fake smiles and rich people talking about their hard lives." She made air quotes with her fingers. "Anything specific standing out to you?" Ethan asked, his tone gentle but probing. Lila hesitated, her expression shifting. It's not the patients that bother me. It's this place. It's too perfect, too controlled. Doesn't that feel weird to you? Ethan frowned slightly. What do you mean by controlled? I don't know, she said, shrugging. Just little things. People disappearing. No one talks about it, but I notice. Like, that guy. Charles something? The one who wouldn't stop complaining about the food? Where is he? Last week he was storming out of sessions, and now it's like he never existed. Charles Baker, Ethan supplied. He remembered the man, a retired oil executive with a short temper. But now that Lila mentioned it, he realized he hadn't seen Charles in days. He completed his treatment early, Ethan said, though the explanation felt hollow even to him. It happens sometimes. Lila raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. Sure, if you say so. Ethan made a mental note to check Charles's file later. Let's focus on you for now, he said, redirecting the conversation. Have you thought more about what we discussed last session? About finding closure for the career loss? Her jaw tightened, and she shook her head. Closure doesn't fix anything, Dr. Carrington. It doesn't bring back what I lost. Maybe not, Ethan acknowledged, but it can help you move forward. Lila didn't respond, her eyes narrowing as though she were dissecting his words for hidden meaning. Ethan waited, giving her space to process, but her mood had shifted. She stayed quiet for the rest of the session, her usual sharpness dulled by something heavier, something she wasn't ready to share. After Lila left, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at his notes. Her words about the facility lingered in his mind, intertwining with his own growing suspicions. He opened Charles Baker's file, scrolling through the electronic records. Discharged, the file read. The notes indicated that Charles had left for continued outpatient care at another facility, but the details were sparse, too sparse for a place as meticulous as Serenity Heights. A soft knock on his door made him close the file quickly. Sophia stepped in, her ever-composed demeanor intact, though her smile seemed thinner today. Busy morning, she asked, glancing at his cluttered desk. Always, Ethan replied, his tone neutral. What's up? I wanted to remind you about the gala tomorrow evening, she said, leaning casually against the doorframe. It's important for the board members to see us united. You'll be there, right? Ethan hesitated. Of course. Her smile widened, though it still didn't reach her eyes. Good. We've been under a lot of scrutiny lately, and I need you to be fully present. No distractions. Ethan nodded, though the subtle edge in her voice set him on edge. As she turned to leave, he called after her. Sophia, about Charles Baker. Why did he leave so suddenly? Sophia paused, her hand on the doorframe. He wasn't responding well to the program, she said smoothly. We referred him to a more specialized facility. Do you know which one? Her eyes flickered briefly, just enough for Ethan to notice. It's in the system somewhere. I'll have Mia send you the details. And with that, she was gone, leaving Ethan more certain than ever that something wasn't right. That evening, Ethan wandered the facility grounds, his steps aimless but his mind racing. The garden paths were dimly lit, the fountains glowing softly in the moonlight. He passed a group of patients sitting in the outdoor lounge, their laughter and casual conversation a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. Dr. Carrington, a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Amanda Voss, her usual calm expression tinged with concern. Amanda, Ethan said, surprised. What are you doing out here? Same as you, I suppose. Clearing my head. She gestured for him to join her on a nearby bench. You look like you've got a lot on your mind. Ethan hesitated, but something about Amanda's steady presence felt reassuring. He sat down beside her, the cool night air brushing against his skin. Do you ever feel like something's off? He asked carefully, testing the waters. Amanda's brow furrowed. Off how? With the facility. The way some cases are handled. Discharges that don't add up. Amanda was silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on the fountain ahead. I've noticed things, she admitted finally, but nothing concrete. And honestly, I've been afraid to dig too deep. Why? Because places like this thrive on their reputation. If you find cracks in the foundation, everything falls apart. People lose their jobs, patients lose their safe space. It's a lot of responsibility to bear. Ethan nodded, though her words only added to his unease. But if there's something wrong, don't we have a responsibility to address it? Of course, Amanda said, her voice firm. But tread carefully, Ethan. This place is bigger than any one of us. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The cracks in the surface were becoming harder to ignore, and the more he looked, the more he felt like the ground beneath him was beginning to shift. The sun rose over Serenity Heights with its usual tranquility, the golden light streaming across the perfectly manicured lawns and reflecting off the glassy surface of the fountains. But for Ethan, the peace was a facade. The unease that had been growing within him was no longer a quiet whisper. It was a persistent thrum in the back of his mind. Something wasn't right, and the more he looked, the more the cracks widened. Ethan's first session of the day was with Gregory Harlan, the tech mogul whose nerves seemed perpetually on edge. Gregory was waiting in Ethan's office when he arrived, pacing the room with short, jerky movements. His wiry frame and hollowed cheeks suggested weeks of sleepless nights and barely managed detox. "Gregory," Ethan said gently, closing the door behind him, "you seem restless this morning." Gregory whirled around, his eyes bloodshot but sharp. "Restless? Try trapped. This place, it's suffocating." Ethan motioned for him to sit, taking his usual place across from him. "You said that last session, about feeling trapped. Tell me more about that." Gregory collapsed into the chair, running a hand through his thinning hair. "It's like they're watching me all the time. The staff, the cameras, even the other patients. I can't trust anyone." Ethan leaned forward, his pen poised. "What makes you feel that way? Has something specific happened?" Gregory hesitated, his jaw tightening. "There's this thing, this feeling, like they're hiding something here. Charles Baker told me he'd found out something big before he vanished. Then one day, poof, he's gone. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone." Ethan's pulse quickened. He tried to keep his voice steady. "What did Charles say he found out?" Gregory shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "I don't know. He wouldn't tell me. Just kept saying, it's all about the donors. Follow the money." Then he disappeared. Ethan's pen stilled. "The donors?" "Yeah," Gregory said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The big money people who fund this place. He said they weren't just here for charity, they had an agenda." And then he was gone. The room fell silent for a moment, Gregory's breathing heavy in the still air. Ethan's thoughts raced. Was Gregory's paranoia simply a symptom of his addiction and withdrawal, or was there something more to it? After Gregory left, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he debated his next move. Finally, he opened the internal database and typed in Charles Baker. His file appeared instantly, and Ethan skimmed through it, noting the standard discharge summary. But something about the notes felt off. The language was clinical and vague, lacking the usual detail. There were no follow-up care instructions, no indication of where Charles had gone or who had taken over his case. It was as if Charles had simply vanished. Ethan frowned, his curiosity piqued. He scrolled further down, and a notation caught his eye. "Transfer to restricted program. Authorization. S. Carrington." Sophia had signed off on Charles's transfer, but there was no indication of where or why. Ethan's stomach twisted. He minimized the file and leaned back in his chair, his mind churning. Why hadn't Sophia mentioned this? What exactly was the restricted program? That evening, Ethan waited until dinner to broach the subject with Sophia. They sat at their usual table in the private dining room reserved for senior staff, the atmosphere polished and subdued. A bottle of red wine sat between them, untouched by Ethan but half-finished by Sophia. "How was your day?" Sophia asked, her tone light but detached. "Busy," Ethan replied, watching her closely. "I reviewed a file today, Charles Baker's. Something caught my attention." Sophia's fork stilled over her plate, but her expression didn't change. "Oh, it says he was transferred to a restricted program. You signed off on it." Sophia resumed eating, her movements controlled. "Yes, Charles wasn't responding to the standard program. We sent him to a more specialized facility that focuses on cases like his." Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. "What facility?" There's no record of it in his file. Sophia's gaze met his, calm and unyielding. It's in the secure system. Only certain staff have access. And why didn't you mention it to me? Her smile was faint, almost patronizing. Ethan, you're a psychologist. Your focus is on the patients in your care, not administrative decisions. Charles's transfer didn't concern you. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm his psychologist. Of course it concerns me. Sophia sighed, setting her fork down. Ethan, you need to trust me. Transfers like Charles's happen all the time. Not every case is going to have a neat ending. That's just the nature of this work. Her words were logical, even reasonable, but they did little to ease the unease gnawing at him. He nodded reluctantly, knowing he wouldn't get anything more out of her tonight. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing fast. Later that night, Ethan sat in the courtyard, nursing a cup of tea as the evening chill settled in. The soft glow of garden lights bathed the space in a calming hue, but his mind was anything but calm. Can't sleep either? A voice asked. He looked up to see Lila standing nearby, her arms crossed over her sweatshirt. Something like that, Ethan said, motioning for her to sit. She sank into the chair across from him, her sharp gaze studying him. You look like you've seen a ghost. Ethan hesitated, debating how much to share. It's this place, he said finally. The more I look, the more questions I have. Lila smirked. Welcome to the club. Charles Baker, Ethan said, lowering his voice. You mentioned him before. Did he say anything else about what he'd found out? Lila's expression darkened. Not much. Just that the donors control everything here. He said they weren't just funding the place, they were using it for something. Something bad. Ethan leaned in. Did he tell you who the donors are? She shook her head. No, but I got the feeling they're not the kind of people you mess with. Whatever Charles found out, it scared him. That's why I think he's gone. They didn't transfer him, they got rid of him. Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Do you have proof? Lila laughed bitterly. Proof? I'm a washed-up journalist in rehab. No one listens to people like me. But if you're smart, you'll be careful, Dr. Carrington. You start pulling at the wrong threads, and this whole place could unravel. And so could you. The following day brought a gray sky, the first hints of an approaching storm casting long shadows over Serenity Heights. Despite the overcast weather, the facility bustled with its usual energy. Patients in the courtyard for yoga, staff shuffling between sessions, and the faint hum of golf carts carrying supplies across the sprawling estate. To the untrained eye, it was a sanctuary. But Ethan's mind buzzed with what he now knew was a carefully constructed illusion. After his conversation with Lila the night before, the cracks in the facade were no longer ignorable. His thoughts returned to Charles Baker, the missing patient who, according to Lila, had uncovered something he wasn't supposed to. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to tread carefully, but curiosity, and something deeper, a need for truth, drove him forward. Ethan's first session that morning was with Victor Lang, the charming hedge fund manager whose charisma often bordered on arrogance. Victor lounged in the plush leather chair across from Ethan's desk, his tailored shirt unbuttoned just enough to suggest effortless confidence. So, Dr. Carrington, Victor began, his tone light, how do you think I'm doing? Still a danger to society, or am I finally on the path to enlightenment? Ethan smiled faintly, not letting Victor's bravado distract him. Progress isn't about labels, Victor. It's about honesty, with yourself and others. Victor leaned back, his smile widening. Honesty, huh? That's a dangerous word in a place like this. Ethan's pulse quickened. What do you mean by that? Victor chuckled, swirling the glass of water in his hand like it was expensive whiskey. Just an observation. Serenity Heights is all about appearances, isn't it? Everyone here, from the staff to the patients, is playing a role. Some play it better than others. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Are you saying there's something you've noticed? Something about the staff? Victor smirked, leaning forward slightly. Come on, document. You're a smart guy. You've been here long enough to see that not everything adds up. The missing patients, the strange transfers, the whispers you pretend not to hear. This place has secrets. Ethan kept his expression neutral, though his heart pounded. You seem very sure of yourself. Victor's grin faded, and for a moment, his polished veneer cracked, revealing something darker beneath. Let's just say I've learned how to spot a rigged game. And this place? It's a masterpiece of misdirection. Before Ethan could press further, Victor stood, his usual confidence returning. That's enough honesty for one day. Let's save the rest for next session. Victor's words lingered long after he left. Whether intentionally or not, he had confirmed Ethan's suspicions. Serenity Heights was hiding something, and Victor knew more than he let on. Later that afternoon, Ethan sought out Dr. Amanda Voss, his colleague and confidant. He found her in her office, reviewing notes on a group therapy session. The room smelled faintly of lavender, a diffuser on her desk releasing calming scents. "Ethan," Amanda greeted, looking up from her work, "you look like you've got something on your mind." He shut the door behind him and took a seat across from her. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Amanda set her pen down, her brow furrowing. "Okay, what's going on? Have you ever noticed anything unusual about this place? Missing patients, unexplained transfers, things that don't add up?" Amanda's eyes widened slightly, and she leaned back in her chair. "Why do you ask?" Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I've been looking into Charles Baker's file. Something about his transfer doesn't sit right with me. And I've had a few patients, Lila Harper, Victor Lang, drop hints that there's more going on here than we're being told." Amanda exhaled slowly, crossing her arms. "You're not wrong, Ethan. I've noticed things too. Patients disappearing with no real explanation, files that are incomplete or doctored, Sophia making decisions behind closed doors. I've tried to push back when I can. But what?" Ethan pressed. Amanda's gaze dropped. "I've been warned. Subtly, of course, but enough to know that if I dig too deep, my job, and maybe my career, is on the line. This place has powerful backers, Ethan. People who don't like being questioned." Her words sent a chill through him, but they also confirmed what he already suspected. "If that's true, we can't just sit by and let it happen." Amanda studied him for a long moment. "What are you planning to do?" "I don't know yet," Ethan admitted, "but I can't ignore it anymore. If you have any information, anything that could help me figure out what's really going on, I need you to share it." Amanda nodded slowly. "I'll help you, Ethan, but be careful. Whatever this is, it's bigger than you think." That evening, Ethan returned to his office, determined to dig deeper. He reopened Charles Baker's file and cross-referenced it with the facility's internal records. As he searched, he found a series of discrepancies, notes that didn't align, missing timestamps, and a curious lack of follow-up appointments. His stomach churned as a pattern began to emerge. A knock at the door startled him. Sophia stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "Burning the midnight oil?" she asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Just catching up on paperwork," Ethan replied, closing his laptop. Sophia's gaze lingered on him, sharp and calculating. "You've been asking a lot of questions lately. About Charles, about transfers. Is there something you're not telling me?" Ethan forced a calm smile. "I'm just trying to understand how things work around here. It's my job to look out for the patients. And it's my job to look out for the facility," Sophia said pointedly. "I hope you're not letting your imagination get the better of you." Her words carried an edge, a warning wrapped in concern. Ethan met her gaze, refusing to flinch. "I'm just doing my job, Sophia." She held his gaze for a moment longer before nodding. "Good. Let's keep it that way." As she left, Ethan's resolve hardened. Sophia was hiding something. Of that he was now certain, and if she thought he was going to back down, she was wrong. The rain had eased by morning, leaving the grounds of Serenity Heights drenched in a fine mist. The air was heavy, and the staff moved about their routines with quiet efficiency, their voices muted in the humid stillness. For Ethan, the day felt charged, as though the storm had left behind an unspoken tension, lingering in every shadow. The weight of his discoveries, and the suspicions they had sparked, pressed heavily on him. But it wasn't just what he had learned. It was what he had begun to feel. The world around him seemed to shift subtly, as though the polished veneer of the facility was warping into something darker. Ethan arrived at his office early, hoping to get ahead of the day. When he opened his laptop, an unread email immediately caught his eye. It was from an anonymous address and contained only a single sentence. Check the restricted files under patient 047. His pulse quickened. He hesitated, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. Then, with a deep breath, he accessed the internal database. He typed 047 into the search bar, and the file appeared, locked behind a higher-level clearance. His heart sank. A second email arrived almost immediately. Use the bypass code, A8LQ4R. Ethan's hands trembled as he entered the code. The file unlocked, revealing a brief but chilling entry. Patient ID, 047. Name, Charles Baker. Status, transferred to Program E. Program E? Ethan had never heard of it. There were no details, no notes, just those cryptic words. But the deeper he delved, the more certain he became that Charles Baker hadn't been transferred in the traditional sense. He had been erased. By mid-morning, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. As he crossed the courtyard on his way to a session, he noticed staff members glancing at him, their expressions unreadable. A nurse whispered something to another as he passed, and they both quickly looked away. When he reached his office after lunch, Sophia was waiting for him, sitting in his chair with her arms crossed. "You've been busy," she said, her tone cool but sharp. Ethan shut the door and leaned against it, forcing calm into his voice. "What are you talking about?" Sophia held up a printed sheet of paper. "This is a log of your activity on the database. You've been accessing files you're not cleared for, Ethan. That's a breach of protocol." He felt the blood drain from his face. "Sophia, I'm just trying to understand what's going on with certain patients." "And what exactly do you think is going on?" she asked, rising from the chair and stepping toward him. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but her eyes were ice. "I think this facility isn't what it claims to be," Ethan said carefully. "I think there are programs, like Program E, that you haven't told me about." Sophia's expression darkened. "You're paranoid. Do you realize how dangerous that kind of thinking is? For you? For the facility? You're letting your imagination run wild." "I'm not imagining things," Ethan shot back. "Charles Baker didn't just disappear. And I'm not the only one who's noticed. Patients are talking, Sophia. People are asking questions." Sophia's face hardened, her mask of warmth dropping. "Listen to me, Ethan. You need to stop this. Right now. Do your job, focus on your patients, and leave the rest to me. This isn't a fight you can win." She brushed past him and opened the door. "Oh, and one more thing," she said over her shoulder. "For your own sake, I'd suggest you stop digging. Some things are better left buried." Sophia's threat rattled Ethan more than he cared to admit. Her sudden shift from concern to cold was unnerving, but it also confirmed what he had suspected. She was involved in whatever was happening at Serenity Heights. The question was, how deeply? Later that day, he searched for his handwritten notes on Charles Baker, only to find them missing. His desk drawer, where he always kept patient files under lock and key, had been disturbed. Panic prickled at the edges of his thoughts. Had someone been in his office? And if so, who? A knock at the door broke his concentration. It was Amanda, her face pale and drawn. "Can we talk?" she asked, closing the door behind her. She perched on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice low. "I think someone's trying to scare me," Amanda admitted. "I found a note in my office this morning. It said, 'You're being watched.'" She hesitated, then added, "And I'm pretty sure my files have been tampered with." Ethan leaned forward, his unease deepening. "You think someone's targeting you?" Amanda nodded. "I don't know who, but I've been asking questions too, Ethan. About transfers, about missing patients. And now I feel like I've painted a target on my back." Ethan's mind raced. "We're in this together," he said finally. "Whoever's behind this, they're trying to intimidate us. But we can't let them win." Amanda looked at him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Then we need a plan." That night, Ethan sat in his office long after everyone else had gone home, piecing together what little information he had. The cryptic files, Lila's warnings, Victor's hints, and Sophia's escalating hostility all pointed to something big, something dangerous. Just as he was about to leave, his phone buzzed with a text, "Meet me in the greenhouse. Now." It was from Lila. Ethan frowned but grabbed his coat and headed for the greenhouse, a glass structure on the far edge of the property. The air was damp and cool as he stepped inside, the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers thick around him. Lila was waiting in the far corner, her arms crossed and her expression tense. "What's going on?" Ethan asked. "You were right," she said without preamble. "This place, it's dirty, filthy. I've been digging into the donors like Charles said. They're not just rich philanthropists. They're tied to big pharmaceutical companies. Companies that specialize in experimental treatments." Ethan's heart raced. Treatments? For what? Lila hesitated, then handed him a folder. "For everything. Depression, PTSD, addiction. They're using the patients here as guinea pigs, Ethan. People like Charles, they weren't discharged. They were transferred to labs. And I think some of them didn't make it out." Ethan opened the folder, his hands trembling as he skimmed the documents inside. Financial records, emails, even a blurry photo of a lab that looked more like a dungeon. "This is why they're trying to silence us," Lila said. "They know we're close to the truth." Ethan closed the folder, his jaw tightening. "Then we need to bring this to someone who can stop them." Lila shook her head. "Not yet. We need more evidence, something undeniable." The storm had returned, the pounding rain and howling wind creating a symphony of unease around Serenity Heights. The facility's luxurious exterior, with its glowing windows and pristine gardens, seemed to shudder under the weight of the weather. Inside, however, the polished routines carried on as though nothing was amiss. Patients shuffled between sessions, staff whispered quietly in the halls, and the ever-present hum of calm pervaded the air. But for Ethan, the calm was an illusion. He sat in his office, the folder Lila had given him spread across his desk. The evidence was damning. Financial records tracing back to pharmaceutical companies with a history of unethical practices, emails hinting at undisclosed experiments, and a blurred image of what appeared to be a sterile lab filled with unfamiliar equipment. Yet, the most chilling document was a memo labeled Program E, Operational Directive, with the words Patient 047. Results pending typed in bold at the bottom. Ethan couldn't ignore the urgency of the situation any longer. He texted Amanda, "Need to meet. Tonight. Greenhouse." When she arrived, her face was pale but determined. She carried a small tablet tucked under her arm and wore the kind of expression reserved for life-or-death situations. "You found something," she said, sitting down beside him on the greenhouse bench. Ethan slid the folder toward her. "More than something. This is what's been going on. Patients like Charles Baker, they weren't transferred. They were sent to a secret program for experimental treatments. And I think it's happening on site." Amanda's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. This is monstrous." "It gets worse," Ethan said, pulling up an email on his phone. Lila uncovered financial records showing that these experiments are being funded by the facility's donors, companies tied to pharmaceuticals with a history of human rights violations. Amanda looked at him, her voice trembling with anger. "How did they cover this up for so long?" "They control everything here," Ethan said grimly. "The staff, the patients, even the records. Sophia's part of it, Amanda. She's been signing off on these transfers." Amanda sat back, her face etched with disbelief. "We have to stop this. But how? If they know we're onto them." "They already suspect," Ethan interrupted. "Sophia's been watching me. My files have been tampered with. We're running out of time." Amanda straightened, her expression hardening. "What's the plan?" "We find the lab," Ethan said simply. "Tonight." Later that evening, Ethan and Amanda met in the facility's lower levels, where the administrative offices gave way to storage rooms and maintenance corridors. The air here was colder, the lighting dimmer, and the usual hum of activity was replaced by an eerie silence. "This way," Amanda whispered, pointing to a door marked restricted access. She pulled out her tablet and began typing furiously. I lifted the code from Sophia's files. "Let's hope it still works." The door unlocked with a faint beep, and they stepped into a long, sterile hallway. The walls were lined with steel panels, and the faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air. Ethan's heart pounded as they moved forward, their footsteps muffled by the rubber flooring. At the end of the hallway, they found another door, this one labeled Laboratory B2. Authorized personnel only. Amanda keyed in the code again, and the door slid open. What they saw inside made Ethan's stomach turn. The room was vast, lined with rows of medical equipment that looked like something out of a science fiction film. Monitors beeped softly, displaying vital signs and streams of data that Ethan couldn't decipher. Along one wall were metal gurneys, each with restraints and surgical tools neatly arranged beside them. A faint hum came from a machine in the corner, its purpose unclear but undeniably sinister. Amanda moved to a computer terminal and began scanning the files. "Ethan, look at this." He joined her, his eyes widening as he read the screen. The documents detailed experimental treatments for addiction, depression, and PTSD, using untested methods involving neural implants and chemical infusions. Each patient was identified only by a number. "Patient 047, Ethan muttered, scrolling through the entries. "Charles Baker. Procedure incomplete. Status unknown." "They're using these people as test subjects," Amanda whispered. "No oversight, no ethical review. Just experiments." Ethan clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. "Where are the patients now?" Amanda clicked through several files before freezing. "Ethan, some of them didn't survive." His stomach dropped as he read the list of terminated cases. Charles Baker's name wasn't on it, but several others were. Each entry included clinical notes that stripped away any humanity from the individuals described. Subject expired during procedure phase 2. Cause of death, cardiac arrest due to chemical overload. Subject unresponsive post-treatment. Declared deceased after 48 hours. "They're killing people," Amanda said, her voice shaking. "This isn't treatment, it's murder." Before they could process the horror, a faint noise startled them. Footsteps echoed from the hallway outside, growing louder with each passing second. "Someone's coming," Amanda hissed. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a supply closet near the back. "In there. Now." They slipped inside just as the lab door opened. Through the narrow slats of the closet, they watched as two figures entered, Sophia and Victor. "Everything's on schedule," Sophia said, her tone brisk. "The next phase starts tomorrow." Victor smirked, leaning casually against a counter. "And what about our nosy doctor? Is he still playing detective?" Sophia's expression darkened. "He's a problem, but I'll handle it. He doesn't know how deep this goes." Victor chuckled. "You'd better. If he keeps poking around, we might have to accelerate his treatment." Ethan's blood ran cold. "They're watching me, planning something for me." Sophia moved toward the computer, typing something into the terminal. "I'll make sure he's too distracted to interfere. We've come too far to let him ruin this." Victor's grin widened. "Good. Because if he becomes too much of a liability, you know what we'll have to do." Sophia hesitated, her fingers stilling on the keyboard. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." They left soon after, the door hissing shut behind them. Ethan and Amanda waited several long moments before emerging, their breaths shaky. "We have to go," Amanda whispered. "Now." Ethan nodded, but as they turned to leave, his eyes caught something on the computer screen. A list of scheduled procedures, with names attached. His own name was on the list. Ethan and Amanda fled the lab, their hearts pounding and their minds racing. The truth was more horrifying than they had imagined, and the stakes had risen to life and death. With the facility closing in on them, they knew they were running out of time to stop the nightmare unfolding beneath the surface of Serenity Heights. The storm raged through the night, its thunder echoing like a warning across the grounds of Serenity Heights. Ethan sat in his office, the folder from Lila tucked securely into his locked drawer. His mind replayed what he and Amanda had discovered in the lab. The sterile gurneys, the horrifying patient logs, and his own name listed among the scheduled procedures. The noose was tightening, and he knew it was only a matter of time before Sophia and Victor made their move. But if they thought he was going to wait passively for them to strike, they were wrong. Ethan met Amanda early the next morning in her office, her eyes rimmed with the telltale redness of a sleepless night. She closed the door behind him, and they spoke in hushed tones. "We need to get out of here," Amanda said, her voice firm but shaking. "You, me, Lila. We're all targets now. They're not going to let us walk away with what we know." Ethan nodded, though a knot of dread formed in his stomach. "I agree. But we can't leave without evidence, something that will blow this wide open. If we run without proof, they'll bury everything and come after us anyway." Amanda hesitated, biting her lip. "What about the files in the lab? If we could download them, they'd know the second we access their system," Ethan said. "Sophia and Victor are already watching everything I do. We need another way." Amanda paced the small office, her hands twisting nervously. "What about Lila? She has investigative experience. Maybe she can help us figure out how to gather evidence." Ethan nodded slowly. "Let's bring her in. But we need to move carefully. If Sophia even suspects we're working together, it's over." Ethan and Amanda met Lila in the greenhouse that evening, the storm having finally subsided. The air was damp and heavy, and the faint scent of rain lingered among the flowers. Lila arrived wearing a hoodie and jeans, her usual sharp demeanor replaced by wary tension. "You look worse than I do," she said, her green eyes scanning their faces. "What's going on?" Ethan handed her the folder and let her read in silence. As she flipped through the pages, her expression darkened. "This is worse than I thought," Lila muttered, slamming the folder shut. "I knew they were shady, but this is medieval." "We need evidence," Amanda said. "Something solid that we can take to the authorities." Lila nodded, her mind already working. "They're not stupid. If we try to pull files from the lab again, they'll know immediately. But if we could get their physical records—" Ethan frowned. "You think they have hard copies?" Lila smirked, her confidence returning. "All operations like this do. Digital files can be hacked or leaked. Hard copies? Easier to control. My guess is they're stored in a restricted area, probably the admin wing or Sophia's office." Amanda's eyes widened. "You want us to break into Sophia's office? Got a better idea?" Lila shot back. The plan came together quickly, but executing it was another matter. They chose the dead of night, when the facility was at its quietest. Lila would serve as the lookout while Ethan and Amanda searched Sophia's office for the records. The admin wing was eerily silent as they crept through the dimly lit hallways. The security cameras, which normally scanned the corridors, had been temporarily disabled by Amanda, a trick she had picked up while working with the IT team. When they reached Sophia's office, Ethan worked quickly to pick the lock. The click of the tumblers echoed loudly in the stillness, making Amanda flinch. "Hurry," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. Finally, the lock gave, and the door swung open. Sophia's office was as polished and immaculate as the rest of the facility, with a massive desk dominating the center and shelves lined with binders and books. "They've got to be here," Lila whispered, joining them inside. "Start with the filing cabinets." The three of them moved in unison, rifling through drawers and flipping through files. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for, a thick binder labeled Program E, Confidential. Ethan flipped it open, his hands shaking. Inside were detailed patient records, financial logs, and correspondence that implicated Sophia, Victor, and several high-profile donors. It was everything they needed. "Got it," Ethan said, closing the binder. "Let's get out of here." As they stepped back into the hallway, the sound of approaching footsteps froze them in their tracks. A flashlight beam flickered down the corridor, sweeping across the walls. "Security," Amanda hissed, her voice barely audible. Ethan motioned for them to follow him. They ducked into a nearby supply closet, pressing themselves against the shelves as the footsteps grew louder. The guard paused outside the closet, the beam of his flashlight lingering on the door. Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. After what felt like an eternity, the light moved on, and the footsteps faded into the distance. Lila exhaled shakily. That was too close. Ethan nodded, clutching the binder tightly. "Let's go. Now." By the time they made it back to Ethan's office, adrenaline was coursing through his veins. They had the evidence they needed, but their actions hadn't gone unnoticed. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sophia. "We need to talk. My office. Now." She knows, Amanda said, reading over his shoulder. She must have realized what we took. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then we don't have much time. Lila, scan the binder. Make digital copies of everything and send them to a secure drive. Amanda, reach out to anyone you trust on the outside. We need an escape plan. What about you? Amanda asked. Ethan slipped his phone into his pocket, his expression grim. I'm going to buy us some time. Sophia was waiting in her office when Ethan arrived. She stood behind her desk, her arms crossed and her expression colder than he had ever seen it. You've been busy, she said, her voice laced with quiet fury. I could say the same about you, Ethan replied evenly. Sophia's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake, Ethan. You don't understand what's at stake here. Enlighten me, he said, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're experimenting on patients without their consent. You're destroying lives, Sophia. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You have no idea what you've stumbled into. This isn't just about you or me. It's bigger than that. Bigger than this facility. Then tell me, Ethan pressed. Tell me why people like Charles Baker had to disappear. Why you signed off on their fates. Sophia's composure cracked, just for a moment. Because they were going to die anyway, Ethan. Do you understand? These experiments, these treatments, they're the future. We're saving lives. At what cost? Ethan demanded. How many lives are you willing to destroy in the name of progress? Sophia's silence spoke volumes. Finally, she straightened, her mask of calm returning. You need to decide, Ethan. Are you with us or against us? Because if you're against us, there's no turning back. Ethan met her gaze, his resolve hardening. I'm against you. As Ethan walked out of Sophia's office, the storm inside him was fiercer than the one outside. He had made his choice, and now there was no going back. With the evidence in hand and time running out, the final confrontation was on the horizon, and the stakes had never been higher. The storm continued to rage the following day, the sky a swirling mass of gray that mirrored the tension inside Serenity Heights. Ethan sat in his office, staring at the scanned copies of the evidence Lila had sent to a secure server. The reality of their situation weighed heavily on him. They had what they needed to expose the conspiracy, but the question remained, how to do it without getting themselves killed. Amanda burst into his office without knocking, her face pale. We have a problem. Ethan looked up sharply. What now? They've increased security, she said, closing the door behind her. Guards are patrolling the admin wing and the lower levels. I think Sophia's suspects were about to make our move. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his hair. She knows. I told her I wasn't on her side. Amanda's eyes widened. You what? Ethan, that puts all of us in danger. I didn't have a choice, he said, his voice low but firm. She was cornering me. If I hadn't made a stand, she would have kept pressing. Amanda sighed, pacing the room. Fine, but now we're out of time. We need to act today. Ethan nodded. What about Lila? Is she ready? She's waiting by the north exit, Amanda said. She's got her press contacts on standby. Once we're clear, she's sending everything to the media and the authorities. What about the patients? Ethan asked, his mind racing. They're still in danger. If we blow this open, we need to make sure they're safe. Amanda hesitated. We can alert the authorities, but that's all we can do right now. We can't save everyone ourselves. Ethan hated the thought of leaving the patients behind, but he knew Amanda was right. They couldn't save anyone if they didn't save themselves first. As they moved through the facility, they kept their heads down, avoiding the guards stationed at key entry points. Lila was waiting near the north exit, her hoodie pulled low over her face. You're late, she hissed. I've been standing here for 20 minutes, trying not to look suspicious. Security's tighter than we thought, Amanda whispered. Do you have everything? Lila held up a flash drive. Every file, every document. It's all here. Once I'm out, I'll upload it to the cloud and send it to my contacts. Ethan nodded. We'll cover you. Just get to the car. They moved quickly but carefully, their nerves on edge. Just as they reached the final hallway, a loud alarm blared through the building. They know, Lila said. her voice rising in panic. "Go!" Ethan shouted, shoving her toward the exit. "We'll hold them off." Lila hesitated, her eyes wide, but Amanda grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Ethan turned to face the approaching guards, his heart pounding. He wasn't a fighter, but he didn't need to be. He just needed to stall. Sophia and Victor appeared at the end of the hall, flanked by guards. Sophia's expression was cold, her usual composure replaced by fury. "This is the end of the line, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing above the alarm. "You've made your choice, and now you'll face the consequences." Ethan stood his ground, his fists clenched. "You can't stop the truth, Sophia. It's already out." Victor laughed, his tone mocking. "Oh, please. You think the world cares about a few rich addicts? They'll sweep this under the rug just like everything else." Ethan glared at him. "You're underestimating people. The truth matters." Sophia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Not here. Not now. This place is bigger than you, Ethan. It's bigger than all of us." Ethan smirked, defiant. "Maybe, but it's not bigger than justice." Sophia motioned to the guards. "Take him." Before the guards could reach him, a loud crash echoed through the hall. Lila, standing by the exit, had activated the facility's fire suppression system. Water sprayed down from the ceiling, creating chaos as the guards stumbled in the slippery hallway. "Ethan, run!" Lila shouted. He didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the exit, slipping past the guards as they struggled to regain control. Sophia's shouts of rage echoed behind him, but he didn't look back. By the time he reached the car, Amanda and Lila were already inside, the engine running. He jumped into the back seat, and Lila floored the gas, speeding away from the facility as the alarm continued to wail. The car sped away from Serenity Heights, rain lashing against the windshield as Lila navigated the winding roads with practiced precision. The flash drive in her pocket felt heavier than it should, weighted with the damning evidence they had risked everything to obtain. Ethan and Amanda sat silently in the back seat, their breathing uneven and their clothes damp from the sprinkler system. "Where are we headed?" Amanda finally asked, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "To a motel outside the city," Lila replied, her eyes fixed on the road. "It's safe. We'll regroup there and figure out the next steps." Ethan leaned his head back against the seat, exhaustion threatening to overtake him. But his mind wouldn't stop racing, not about the escape, nor about Sophia and Victor. The image of them standing together in the hallway, their synchronized hostility and shared purpose, had been etched into his memory. There was something between them, something deeper than professional loyalty. Back at Serenity Heights, Sophia stormed into her private office, slamming the door shut behind her. Victor followed moments later, his casual swagger barely concealing his frustration. "That was a disaster," Sophia snapped, pacing the room. "How did they even get into my office? You were supposed to handle the security upgrades." Victor rolled his eyes, leaning against the desk. "Don't pin this on me, sweetheart. Your golden boy, Ethan, has been playing detective for weeks. This was bound to happen." Sophia whirled on him, her anger palpable. "You were supposed to keep an eye on him. Instead, you let him dig his way into our operation and steal evidence that could ruin everything." Victor straightened, his expression darkening. "Don't talk to me like I'm your lackey. We're partners in this, remember?" Sophia crossed her arms, her voice cold. "Partners? Is that what we are? Because lately, it feels like I'm the one cleaning up your messes." Victor closed the distance between them, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Don't forget who brought you into this. Without me, you'd still be a glorified administrator. I made you." Sophia's jaw tightened, but she didn't back down. "And without me, this operation would have fallen apart years ago. You may have the connections, Victor, but I'm the one keeping everything running." The tension between them was electric, years of shared secrets and mutual dependency boiling to the surface. Finally, Victor's expression softened, and he reached for her, his hand brushing her arm. "Look," he said, his voice quieter. "I know things are messy right now, but we'll fix it. We always do." Sophia hesitated, her resolve wavering as she looked into his eyes. "We're running out of time. If Ethan goes public with what he has, he won't, Victor said firmly, pulling her closer. We'll find him, stop him, and make sure this doesn't go any further. For a moment, Sophia allowed herself to lean into him, the weight of her anger and fear dissipating. She hated how much she needed him, his confidence, his ruthlessness, but she couldn't deny it. They were two sides of the same coin, bound together by ambition and secrets. Meanwhile, Ethan, Amanda, and Lila huddled in a dingy motel room on the outskirts of the city. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the single overhead light cast harsh shadows on the peeling wallpaper. It was a far cry from the luxury of Serenity Heights, but it was safe, for now. Lila plugged the flash drive into her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she uploaded the files to a secure server. Amanda sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands, while Ethan paced the room, his thoughts a chaotic jumble. "We have to be smart about this," Lila said, breaking the silence. "If we release everything at once, they'll bury it before anyone even has a chance to read it. Then what do we do?" Amanda asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "We go to the media," Ethan said firmly, "but not just any outlet. We need someone who won't back down, even if they're threatened. Someone with a platform big enough to make it impossible for Sophia and Victor to silence this." "I've got a few contacts from my journalism days," Lila offered. "Investigative reporters who specialize in exposing corruption. They'll listen." Ethan nodded. "Good. And we need to alert the authorities. The patients at Serenity Heights are still in danger." Lila hesitated. "That's risky. If the cops show up too early, Sophia will spin it as a misunderstanding and destroy the evidence." "She won't have time," Ethan said. "Once the story breaks, the public outcry will force them to act." Back at Serenity Heights, Victor sat in his own office, sipping whiskey as he stared at his phone. He had already sent out feelers to his network of contacts, warning them about the potential fallout. But one name on his list gave him pause. He dialed the number, his jaw tightening as the line rang. When the person answered, Victor's tone was cold and deliberate. "We've got a situation," he said. "Ethan Carrington and his little friends stole some sensitive files. I need them found and silenced before this gets out of hand." The voice on the other end responded curtly, and Victor's lips curved into a grim smile. "Good. Because if they think they can take us down, they're in for a rude awakening." As the night wore on, the tension in the motel room grew palpable. Ethan and Amanda took turns watching the parking lot for any sign of pursuit, while Lila finalized her plans to contact her media allies. Every sound, every creak of the building or car passing on the road, made them jump. "They'll come for us," Amanda said softly, breaking the silence. "Sophia, Victor, whoever they're working for. They won't let us get away with this." Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Then we make sure they don't have a choice. We expose them for what they are." The flash drive, now empty, sat on the table between them, its contents scattered across multiple encrypted servers. The evidence was safe, but their own safety was far from guaranteed. "Tomorrow," Lila said, closing her laptop with a decisive snap, "we blow the lid off this thing. No more hiding." Ethan nodded, his resolve hardening. "Tomorrow." At the motel, Lila's laptop chimed, signaling a successful upload. She spun the screen toward Ethan and Amanda. "It's done. The files are encrypted and distributed to 3 secure servers. If anything happens to us, my contacts will release everything." "Good," Ethan said. "Who's our first contact?" Lila pulled out her phone and scrolled through her list of sources. "Her name's Rachel Donnelly. She's an investigative journalist with the Tribune. If anyone can blow this open, it's her." Amanda nodded. "Can you trust her?" Lila smirked. "I don't trust anyone. But Rachel has a reputation for going after big targets and getting results." "Then let's meet her," Ethan said, grabbing his coat. "The sooner we get this into her hands, the better." The trio met Rachel Donnelly at a cafe on the outskirts of the city. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, with piercing blue eyes and a notebook always at the ready. As they approached her table, she stood and extended a hand. "Lila," Rachel said, shaking her hand firmly, "you've been busy. You don't know the half of it," Lila replied. This is Ethan Carrington and Dr. Amanda Voss. They've been working with me to expose this. Rachel nodded at them, her gaze assessing. All right, let's see what you've got. Lila handed her a flash drive. It's all there. Financial records, patient logs, internal memos, everything you need to prove what's happening at Serenity Heights. Rachel plugged the drive into her laptop and skimmed through the files, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. This is big, she said finally. If even half of this checks out, it's going to blow up. It all checks out, Ethan said firmly. We've seen it with our own eyes. Rachel looked up at him, her expression unreadable. You realize what you're up against, right? These people have resources, connections. They'll come after you. They already have, Amanda said quietly, but we can't let them win. Rachel nodded slowly. All right. I'll start verifying the information and reaching out to my sources. But you need to be careful. Once this goes live, they'll do everything they can to silence you. As Ethan and his allies left the cafe, a black SUV pulled up across the street. Inside, Victor watched through tinted windows, his jaw tightening as he recognized Ethan. They're making their move, he said, his voice low. We need to act now. Sophia, sitting beside him, glanced at the laptop in her lap. I've already sent the orders. By the time they get back to the motel, it'll be too late. Victor smirked. Good. Let's remind them who they're dealing with. When Ethan, Amanda, and Lila returned to the motel, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The door to their room was ajar, and the faint smell of burning electronics lingered in the air. Stay here, Ethan said, motioning for the others to wait as he stepped inside. The room was a disaster. Papers were scattered across the floor, the laptop was smashed, and the flash drives were gone. Whoever had been there had left a clear message. We know where you are. They found us, Amanda said, her voice trembling as she stepped inside. What do we do now? Ethan clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath his calm exterior. We keep going. They can destroy the equipment, but they can't erase the truth. Lila, your contacts still have the files, right? Lila nodded, her expression grim. Yeah, but we've got to move fast. They'll try to discredit us. They already are, Ethan said, holding up a piece of paper he had found on the floor. It was a fake dossier filled with fabricated accusations against him and Amanda, designed to undermine their credibility. They're scared, Lila said, a spark of determination in her eyes. That means we're winning. As the trio regrouped, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You've gone too far. Turn back now, or face the consequences. Ethan stared at the message, his jaw tightening. They're trying to intimidate us. Amanda placed a hand on his arm. But it's not working. We're not stopping now. The final confrontation was imminent. Sophia and Victor had escalated their tactics, but so had Ethan and his allies. With the truth in their hands and their enemies closing in, the fight for justice was about to reach its breaking point. Reporters scrambled to interview former patients and their families, many of whom had been waiting years for their voices to be heard. Among them was a woman named Linda Marlowe, her face etched with grief as she described the loss of her husband, Daniel, a former executive who had checked into Serenity Heights for stress-related health issues. I trusted them, Linda said, her voice trembling as she clutched a photograph of Daniel. They told me he was improving, that the treatments were working. Then, one day, they called to tell me he died of a heart attack. But when I demanded to see his medical records, there were gaps, whole days missing. Now I know why. The camera cut to Linda wiping away tears, her words igniting outrage among viewers. Another former patient, Robert Gaines, recounted his own harrowing experience. A retired teacher, Robert had sought treatment for chronic pain, only to find himself subjected to experimental procedures he never agreed to. They told me it was a routine treatment, Robert said, his hands shaking as he held up a copy of his falsified consent form. I never signed this. They drugged me and made me their guinea pig. The stories piled up, each more devastating than the last, painting a chilling picture of systemic abuse, greed, and cruelty. At Serenity Heights, the scene was chaotic as law enforcement and forensic teams descended on the property. The sprawling facility, once a haven for the wealthy elite, was now surrounded by police cars and media vans. Reporters shouted questions at the officers standing guard at the gates, but none responded. Inside, investigators meticulously combed through every room, armed with a search warrant that granted them unrestricted access. In the basement, they uncovered a series of hidden labs, sterile and cold, filled with disturbing remnants of the experiments. Rows of medical equipment stood abandoned, syringes and vials still scattered across metal trays. One officer noted the presence of detailed logs documenting patient procedures, many of which ended with ominous phrases like status, deceased, or subject noncompliant. In Sophia's private office, investigators found a locked filing cabinet containing financial ledgers that linked Serenity Heights to a network of shadowy corporate donors. The records revealed staggering sums of money flowing into the facility from offshore accounts, with cryptic notations that hinted at their true purpose. Victor Lang's office provided even more damning evidence. Emails and text messages recovered from his devices outlined direct communications with high-profile donors, some of whom had explicitly approved the use of experimental treatments in exchange for shares in the facility's profits. Screenshots of these messages quickly made their way into the media, leaving no room for plausible deniability. Social media platforms exploded with outrage. The hashtags #JusticeForSerenityPatients and #HumanLabExposed trending globally within hours. Posts detailing the scandal were shared millions of times, with users expressing disgust at the revelations and demanding accountability. Influencers and celebrities, many of whom had once praised Serenity Heights, now joined the chorus of condemnation. One high-profile actress, who had previously endorsed the facility, issued a public apology for promoting a place built on lies and human suffering. Her statement garnered widespread support, but also intensified scrutiny on others who had profited from Serenity Heights' glowing reputation. The names of wealthy donors who had funded the experiments began to surface, their carefully curated images of philanthropy now in tatters. Among them was Charles Bannister, a billionaire tech mogul whose foundation had funneled millions into the facility. When confronted by reporters outside his Manhattan office, Bannister offered a terse, no comment, before retreating into the building. Within hours, his company's stock value plummeted as investors distanced themselves from the scandal. Advocacy groups quickly rallied around the victims, organizing press conferences and launching fundraising campaigns to provide legal and emotional support. At one such event, held on the steps of the courthouse, Linda Marlowe stood alongside other families, her voice now steady and resolute. "This isn't just about justice for my husband," she declared, gripping the microphone. "It's about making sure no one else suffers like this ever again." Her words were met with applause and cheers, the crowd galvanized by her determination. The fallout extended far beyond the facility itself. Government officials faced mounting pressure to investigate not only Serenity Heights, but also the regulatory failures that had allowed such abuses to persist. Congressional hearings were announced, with promises to overhaul oversight of private healthcare institutions. By evening, the story had become a global scandal. Late-night talk show hosts delivered scathing monologues about the greed and corruption at Serenity Heights. Editorials in major newspapers called for sweeping reforms, while investigative journalists continued to uncover new layers of the conspiracy. For Sophia and Victor, now held in separate detention centers, the world they had built on lies and exploitation was crumbling faster than they could have imagined. And for the victims and their families, the long-overdue reckoning was only just beginning. The packed courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as the trial of Sophia Langston and Victor Maddox began. This was no ordinary legal proceeding. It was the culmination of one of the most shocking scandals in recent history. Journalists, former patients, and grieving families filled the benches, their faces a mixture of anticipation and fury. Outside, protesters waved signs with slogans like "Justice for Serenity Victims" and "Expose the Human Lab." Sophia Langston, once the polished face of Serenity Heights, sat at the defendant's table, her composed demeanor masking the tension simmering beneath the surface. Her dark suit, tailored to perfection, was a stark contrast to the chaos her actions had caused. Next to her sat Victor Lang, his presence colder and more unsettling. He exuded the same calculated confidence that had allowed him to manipulate so many for so long, though the cracks in his armor were beginning to show. The lead prosecutor, Allison Drake, stepped to the podium, her piercing gaze sweeping across the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a case about greed, deception, and the systematic exploitation of vulnerable individuals," she began. The defendants, Sophia Langston and Victor Lang, used Serenity Heights, a facility that promised healing and hope, as a front for illegal human experimentation and financial fraud. They manipulated patients, falsified consent, and covered up deaths, all in the name of profit. Drake's voice grew sharper as she pointed towards Sophia and Victor. "You will hear testimony from survivors, see records of their crimes, and witness the extent of the harm they caused. The evidence will show, beyond any reasonable doubt, that these two individuals are guilty of all charges." Sophia's lawyer, Martin Avery, rose for the defense's opening statement. He walked slowly to the jury, adopting a calm and measured tone. "What you will see throughout this trial is that my client, Sophia Langston, was not the architect of these alleged crimes. She was a victim of manipulation herself, a pawn in a much larger game orchestrated by Victor Lang and others behind the scenes. She is not guilty." The prosecution wasted no time presenting its case. Testimonies from former patients and families painted a grim picture of Serenity Heights. Linda Marlowe took the stand, clutching a photograph of her late husband. Her voice cracked as she recounted the day she was told he had died. "They said it was a heart attack," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "But now I know they lied. They didn't even let me see his body. They cremated him without my consent." The jury shifted uncomfortably as Linda described finding the falsified medical records in the exposé. Robert Gaines, the retired teacher, described waking up during a procedure he hadn't consented to. "I remember the bright lights, the voices saying, 'Keep him under.' I tried to scream, but I couldn't move." Forensic evidence further incriminated Sophia and Victor. Investigators described discovering the hidden labs, the financial ledgers connecting donors to offshore accounts, and internal emails detailing the experiments. One email from Victor read, "Push the trials. Results mean more donors." Another from Sophia replied, "If they sign the forms, we're covered." No one reads the fine print. Sophia's decision to testify in her own defense was a calculated gamble. She walked to the witness stand with the poise of someone accustomed to controlling a room. Her lawyer stood nearby, ready to guide her through the perilous waters of cross-examination. "Ms. Langston," Avery began, "can you describe your role at Serenity Heights?" "I was the director," Sophia said, her voice steady. "I oversaw operations, patient care, and investor relations. But I trusted my team to manage the details. I had no knowledge of the experiments happening in the basement." The prosecutor rose for cross-examination, her tone sharp. "No knowledge, Ms. Langston? Then how do you explain your emails approving the experiments?" Sophia hesitated but quickly regained her composure. "Those emails were sent at Victor Lang's insistence. He told me they were routine approvals. I didn't know what they were really for." "Were you and Mr. Lang close?" the prosecutor asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Sophia's carefully maintained facade cracked ever so slightly. She glanced at Victor, who stared back impassively. "Yes," she admitted after a pause. "We were lovers." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, and the judge banged her gavel for silence. "And did your romantic relationship influence your decisions?" the prosecutor pressed. Sophia's eyes hardened. "I thought I could trust him. He used our relationship to manipulate me." Victor declined to take the stand, relying instead on his lawyer's defense strategy. But his silence spoke volumes. The prosecution capitalized on this, painting him as the cold mastermind behind the scheme. "He didn't need to take the stand," Drake told the jury in her closing argument. "His actions speak for themselves." Victor Lang exploited everyone, his staff, the patients, even Sophia Langston, to build his empire of lies. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. The courtroom was silent as the judge addressed Sophia and Victor. For the crimes of fraud, conspiracy, and illegal experimentation, the judge began, "We find Victor Lang guilty on all counts." Victor's face remained impassive, though his knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table. The judge turned to Sophia. For your role in these crimes, and despite your claims of coercion, the jury finds you guilty of conspiracy and negligent homicide." Sophia's composure finally broke. She gasped, her hands trembling as she turned to her lawyer. "I didn't know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But it was too late. As Sophia and Victor were led away in handcuffs, the courtroom erupted into a cacophony of reactions. Former patients embraced, their long fight for justice finally yielding results. Reporters rushed to file their stories, capturing every moment of the dramatic conclusion. Ethan stood at the back of the room, watching silently. The weight of the trial lifted slightly from his shoulders, though the scars of the ordeal remained. He had done what he set out to do: expose the truth, seek justice, and begin the long road to healing. Outside the courthouse, protesters erupted in cheers as the verdict was announced. Social media buzzed with updates, the hashtags #JusticeForSerenity Patients and #HumanLabExposed once again trending worldwide. For the first time, there was a sense of closure for those who had suffered. 3 years later, the late afternoon sun bathed the grounds of Haven Pines, a state-of-the-art mental health facility nestled in the rolling hills outside of Boston. Designed with glass walls, lush gardens, and open spaces, it stood as a symbol of transparency and healing, a deliberate contrast to the dark history of Serenity Heights. Patients strolled along the stone paths or worked in the garden, their laughter and chatter blending harmoniously with the rustling of leaves in the cool breeze. Ethan Carrington stood by the window of his office, watching the scene below. A framed photograph sat on his desk, taken at Haven Pines' opening ceremony. Amanda, Lila, and Rachel flanked him in the picture, their smiles radiant with hard-won triumph. It had taken years of dedication, endless fundraising, and countless hours of planning. But the dream of building an ethical and compassionate sanctuary had finally come to fruition. Ethan's thoughts drifted to how far they had all come since the scandal at Serenity Heights. The fallout had been devastating yet necessary, exposing not only the corruption of Sophia Langston and Victor Lang, but also the systemic failures that had allowed such atrocities to occur. Sophia Langston and Victor Lang were serving lengthy prison sentences. Sophia, ever defiant, had continued to plead her innocence in carefully orchestrated interviews from prison, portraying herself as a victim of Victor's manipulation. But few believed her narrative in the face of overwhelming evidence. Victor, on the other hand, remained silent, his appeals failing to gain traction. Their legacies were now cautionary tales, their names synonymous with betrayal and greed. For Ethan, those years had been transformative. He had sold his remaining shares in his former ventures and poured everything into Haven Pines. The facility became more than a place for treatment. It became a community, offering family support programs, patient advocacy, and trauma-informed care. It was a place where people could heal, truly heal, in a way that honored dignity and compassion. Lila had followed a different path. After the trial, she decided to leave the world of investigative reporting behind, not because she regretted her work, but because the toll had become too great. The long nights, the relentless pursuit of truth, it had consumed her. She moved to a small coastal town in Maine, where she opened a bookstore cafe called The Turning Point. The name was fitting. The shop became a haven for readers and thinkers, a place for quiet reflection and lively conversation. Lila had even started a small book club, focusing on stories of resilience and redemption, which drew an eclectic mix of locals and tourists. Though she lived a quieter life now, her sharp wit and passion for uncovering stories remained intact. She visited Haven Pines often, consulting on their public outreach programs and lending her expertise to patient advocacy campaigns. Ethan smiled as he remembered the last time she'd visited, just a week ago, when she had teased him relentlessly for his growing collection of ties. "Trying to look respectable these days," she'd quipped, holding up a paisley tie with mock horror. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long golden rays across the grounds, Ethan stepped outside to join Amanda near the garden. She stood with a clipboard in hand, chatting with a patient about the progress of the herb beds. When she noticed Ethan approaching, she waved him over. "You're late," Amanda said with a smirk. "Lila would be so disappointed in you." Ethan chuckled. "I'm not late. I'm right on time." Amanda raised an eyebrow. You're always late when it's not your meeting. Fair enough, Ethan admitted, leaning against the garden's wooden fence. How's everything here? Good. Better than good, actually, Amanda said. The new art therapy program is a hit, and Rachel's latest article about the facility brought in a wave of donations. Ethan smiled at the thought of Rachel Donnelly, who had continued to champion their mission through her investigative work. It's amazing how far we've come. Amanda nodded, her expression softening. We've all found our place, haven't we? Even Lila, with her cozy little cafe. She seems happy. She is, Ethan agreed. And she deserves it. As the day wound down, Ethan lingered by the garden, watching patients and staff head inside for dinner. The warm light from the building's windows spilled across the grounds, a beacon of hope against the encroaching twilight. The laughter of patients echoed softly in the distance, a reminder that healing was not just possible, it was happening. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Lila. Another donation in your name. Don't let it go to your head. Also, you still owe me dinner next time I'm in town. Ethan laughed softly, typing a quick reply. Dinner's on me. Don't make me regret it. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the sun had dipped below the hills, leaving a canvas of stars. The darkness no longer felt ominous. It was a quiet companion to the light they had created. For the first time in years, Ethan felt whole, not just for himself, but for the lives he had helped change. Lila, Amanda, Rachel, and the patients of Haven Pines. All of them were proof that out of betrayal and loss, something new and beautiful could grow. The journey wasn't over, but for now, there was peace. And that was more than enough. Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to Cheating Storytelling for more gripping real-life tales. Catch you in the next video.